Welcome back, guys. We're so excited to continue in our series in the Gospel according to Luke. As you know, we're still not able to meet face-to-face right now, but we're hoping that these videos will be challenging for you and help to contribute to your spiritual growth, but also will give you something to talk about with those in your sphere of influence. We hope that you'll share this video and possibly get the conversation started about how Jesus has impacted your life and how he can impact theirs too. So we've talked about Gospel according to Luke through the trial of Jesus. We talked about the trial of Jesus last week, and we saw how he was paraded around to a different house or a different governor's palace or to wherever it was so that they could hear from him and decide who he was. And then he was traded for Barabbas, who was a murderer. He was someone who started an insurrection. So we have all of that as a background leading up to this point, but I'd like to emphasize something that we covered earlier this year in the Gospel according to Luke, in Luke chapter 4, verses 9 through 11. The temptation of Jesus happens right here. The devil has Jesus out in the desert, and he is tempting him. And this right here gives us a peek into the power of Jesus. You'll see what I mean by that. Because for us, when we are tempted, we are compelled to give in to some sort of sin, whatever our brand of sin is, if it's pride or lust or anger or something else. We are tempted in a very real way. For pride, we have the option, the temptation to belittle others. Maybe to lie or to cheat so that we can maintain our hard-earned image. If you think about lust, there is an option, a temptation to look at, engage in, or think about inappropriate things in a way that you shouldn't. If you think about anger, you have this feeling welling up inside of you until it bursts, and then you lash out verbally or physically at other people. Those are real temptations for us. They are things that we can do. That's what is happening here for Jesus. They're real temptations, things he can do. And he is told in verses 9 through 11 to summon angels to basically do his bidding and protect him. To show his power by calling angels that are underneath his power to keep him from striking his foot against a stone, to keep him safe and protected. It goes like this. It says, verse 9, "Then he led Jesus to Jerusalem and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, and forever remains written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard and protect you. And they will lift you up on their hands so that you do not strike your foot against a stone.'" Jesus cannot be tempted to do something that he is unable to do. None of us can. That's the reason that you and I are not tempted to use our superpowers, our powers of teleportation or flight or super strength to do evil. And it's because we don't have that option. It's not something we can do. Jesus can do this. This is an option. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a temptation. So, that will serve as a backdrop for the next event in the life of Jesus. We covered the trial of Jesus last week, and we're going to cover the crucifixion of Jesus this week in the Gospel according to Luke. And I'd like to start in the regular account here in Luke 23, verse 33 of the crucifixion. It says this, "When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus was saying, 'Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.' And they cast lots, dividing his clothes among themselves. Now the people stood by watching, but even the rulers ridiculed and sneered at him, saying, 'He saved others from death. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one.' And the soldiers also mocked him, coming up to him and offering him sour wine. They were sarcastically saying, 'If you are really the king of the Jews, save yourself from death.' Now there was also an inscription above him, 'This is the King of the Jews.' One of the criminals who had been hanged on a cross beside him, kept hurling abuse at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us from death." But the other one rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? We are suffering justly because we are getting what we deserve for what we have done. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he was saying, "Jesus, please remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus said to him, "I assure you and most solemnly say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the land until about 3, because the sun was obscured. And the veil of the Holy of Holies of the temple was torn into from top to bottom. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he began praising and honoring God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." All the crowds who had gathered for this spectacle, when they saw what had happened, began to return to their homes, beating their breasts as a sign of mourning. And all his acquaintances and the women who had accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, watching these things. Now, often this picture of the story of the crucifixion is painted as a man who is helpless, and he's dying simply because he has to. But the narrative of the Gospels is very different. The story is not that Jesus was a weak man being led to his fate. That's not it at all. Jesus was God incarnate. He was God in human flesh, and he was intently walking toward the cross. And the cross was an unexpected exclamation point at the end of a life that was spent announcing and inaugurating this kingdom of God. Jesus was proclaiming a message, and that message was punctuated with the cross. So while he was marching toward his imminent death on a tree, remember, that he created, Jesus showed an often overlooked quality: self-control. The scene where Jesus marches from Pontius Pilate's palace to the hill where he is crucified is tough to put into words, because the procession included terrible, terrible things happening to him, because the Roman soldiers, the least of it, the Roman soldiers yelled and shouted at him and spit on him. And the crowds joined in, and we can see how the guards and the Jewish leaders at the time turned this mockery into a parody, and they were parodying what he was convicted of. The guards beat Jesus while he was blindfolded, and they would say, "Prophesy for us. If you're a prophet, prophesy for us. Tell us who is hitting you. Who is it that hit you this time? Prophesy for us." The guards made a sarcastic crown, and they forced it onto the head of the soon-to-be crucified king. He's the King of the Jews. That's what the inscription said. They taunted him to save his own life if he truly was the Messiah, the one who would come to save the people of Israel. Because if he can't save himself, how is he going to save them? Finally, Jesus was put to death by a method reserved for the worst criminals. This entire procession is shameful. Roman crucifixions were reserved for murderers and those who would incite insurrections, like Barabbas, who was released in place of Jesus. Roman citizens were beheaded instead of being crucified, because capital punishment didn't always mean crucifixion. There was capital punishment for things that were bad, and you'd get beheaded. And then there was something way worse, and that was crucifixion. Jews weren't allowed to carry out executions at the time unless Rome permitted it. And when they did, Jews didn't opt for crucifixions. They opted for stonings. They thought it was less grotesque to pick up stones and pelt someone with them until they died. It was less grotesque than a crucifixion to them. Jesus' death, while obviously painful, was equally shameful because of all of these circumstances. And Jesus was beaten. He was stripped naked. He was hung on a cross with stakes in his hands and his feet. And all of this only after he had been flogged and bits of his back were ripped out. we can each think of something or someone particularly heinous. You think of the Bataan Death March, or what Hitler did with the Holocaust, or what Stalin did with people of Russia. And each of those instances require a massive amount of self-restraint from God, because he is so loving and so just. But I would say that those don't even compare to this day, whenever Jesus was hung on the cross, whenever God showed that massive amount of self-control whenever he was hung on a cross. He had to show self-control every single step of the way, every lash of the whip tearing out bits of his back, or every step of the way when the cross would dig into those fresh wounds. Every time a guard would strike him, or a crowd would spit on him, or every insult they would hurl. Every time the hammer struck the nail that was being pushed through him. Every moment, every lash, every step, every strike, every insult, and every punch required Jesus to practice self-control. And remember, Jesus did have angels at the ready. We saw that in Luke chapter 4. So he could have them deliver him anytime. Jesus had shown that he was in control of demons and sickness, and even the weather was underneath his power. He would have no issue getting down from that cross if he desired. But the thing is, the beautiful thing is he didn't desire to be set down. Jesus endured the pain. He endured the shame, using godly self-control so that we, with our blatant lack of self-control, could be with him in paradise. Jesus' impressive feat of restraint and self-control came at the end of a life of sinless perfection. He practiced self-control all the way through his life up to this point and on this day, knowing what was at stake, knowing that his sacrifice would do for us what we could never do for ourselves. No amount of religiousness or forced self-control could do what Jesus did on that day for us. He knew we were bound for eternity without him, so he intervened so that we could have eternity with him. Sometimes we hear of the perfect life of Jesus, and it seems like it may not matter. After all, what does his perfect life back then do for me now? I'm sinful and he's sinless. I'm flawed. He's flawless. I get that. How can I apply this right now? And I'd like us to turn to the book of Hebrews. It tells us in this book that because of Jesus' sinless life, because of his sacrifice, his resurrection, and because of where he is now in the presence of God, he is working as our high priest. Hebrews 4:15-16 says this: "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize and understand our weaknesses and temptations, but one who has been tempted, knowing exactly how it feels to be human, in every respect as we are, yet without committing any sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with confidence and without fear, so that we may receive mercy and find his grace to help in time of need, coming just at the right moment." When we think of the perfect self-control of Jesus and we compare it to our own, it's not supposed to make us wallow in our lack. That's not the story at all. The story of the Bible, the story of the Gospels, is that Jesus was sent by God to be a sacrifice for us, because God loved us so much that he gave him as a sacrifice for us. That in spite of our shortcomings, he would come anyway as a sacrifice. That in spite of my lack of self-control, he would come and show self-control for me. We can look at Jesus' sinlessness exactly how Hebrews tells us to, as a source of confidence. Because of Jesus' perfect self-control, when I lack self-control, I'm still able to come to God confidently. And he will show me grace, and he will show me mercy in my time of need at just the right time. Because of Jesus' sinless self-control, his perfect self-control, whenever you lack self-control, you are able to come to God confidently. And he will show you mercy, and he will show you grace. in your time of need at just the right time. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope that you'll share this video and that it'll spur up conversations with people, that you're able to start a conversation about what Jesus has done for you and what he can do for them. Thanks for listening.